Tôi đã hiểu rõ yêu cầu của bạn. Đây là một dự án lớn. Bạn muốn hợp nhất toàn bộ kịch bản cả câu chuyện Kash Patel và John Kennedy thành một tác phẩm văn xuôi liền mạch. Quy mô tiểu thuyết novel-length, chia làm 3 phần lớn để đạt tổng dung lượng 10 từ. Tôi sẽ viết bằng tiếng Anh cao cấp, Professional English, văn phong chính luận sắc sảo, không sử dụng tiêu đề chương no chapter, headings, và đi sâu vào chi tiết tâm lý, bối cảnh, cũng như các lập luận kỹ thuật. Dưới đây là PHN 1 Part 1 OF3. Phần này tập trung vào sự khởi đầu của cuộc tranh luận với Kash Patel, đi sâu vào các mâu thuẫn về lối sống Tesla, Met Gala và đạo đức cá nhân câu chuyện người bà, The Reckoning of Illusions. Part I. The Architecture of Hypocrisy. The exact, crystallized moment when Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez comprehended that she had unwittingly walked into a calculated, tactical execution rather than a standard televised town hall, was marked not by a sudden shout from the audience or a hostile interjection from the moderator, but by a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the facial expression of the man sitting across from her. Kash Patel did not offer the customary plastic smile that Washington politicians deploy like defensive shields to mask their true intent. Instead, he offered a slight, tight-lipped expression that lacked any warmth whatsoever, the distinctive, predatory look of a seasoned federal prosecutor who has just quietly locked the courtroom doors and is preparing to introduce the singular piece of evidence that will dismantle a defendant's carefully constructed alibi forever. However, Kash Patel had arrived equipped with a markedly different arsenal: an iPad, a heavy leather portfolio filled with verified documentation, and 15 years of experience as a national security official and federal prosecutor who had built a career outmaneuvering individuals who believed they were the smartest people in the room. What transpired over the subsequent 90 minutes would evolve into the most viewed political dismantling of the year, and marked the final occasion the Congresswoman agreed to debate an opponent outside of her carefully controlled environments. The stage was arranged with deceptive simplicity, featuring 2 chairs angled toward one another with a moderator's desk positioned between them, facing a live studio audience of 200 individuals carefully selected to represent a balance of conservatives, liberals, and the politically unaffiliated. Although News Nation had promoted the event as the Great Debate, populism versus the establishment, that framing had already irked both participants for differing reasons. AOC took her seat first, adjusting her lapel microphone with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to countless interviews, and offered the audience a rehearsed, relatable smile intended to convey solidarity. Despite the stark contrast between her high-end wardrobe and the average attire of the attendees, a smattering of applause greeted her, to which she waved with a practiced grace. Patel walked out to a noticeably louder, more rugged reception, which seemed to catch the producers off guard. He took his seat, placed his leather portfolio on the small side table with a deliberate heaviness that echoed slightly in the microphones, and nodded to the moderator with a professional courtesy born of years spent in courtrooms and classified briefings. The moderator, Sarah Chen, regarded both candidates with the wary expression of a host who sensed that the atmospheric pressure in the room was dropping rapidly, signaling an approaching storm. Before the formal proceedings could even commence, AOC interrupted the initial pleasantries, immediately pivoting to her offensive strategy by stating that she found the very existence of the debate interesting, asserting that individuals like Kash Patel represented everything erroneous about the modern American political landscape. She launched into a monologue characterizing him as a subservient defender of the 1%, a man who prioritized corporate profits over the protection of working families and a symbol of the corruption she was elected to fight. She was roughly 45 seconds into her standard stump speech, the rhythm of her rhetoric rising, when Patel raised his hand with the calm authority of a tenured professor correcting a freshman's factual error. He apologized for the interruption but requested permission to ask a singular, brief question before she continued with her prepared attacks. Sarah Chen looked momentarily confused, as this deviation was not in the script, and the producers in the control room hesitated, but Patel turned directly to AOC, locking eyes with her, and inquired simply how she had arrived at the studio that evening. The banality of the question seemed to throw her off balance. She blinked in confusion, her rhythm broken, and replied dismissively that she had driven, implying the question was a waste of valuable airtime. Patel pressed further, his voice dropping an octave, asking why she had chosen to drive that particular vehicle. He was already tapping his iPad, and the large screen behind them, intended for general graphics, suddenly illuminated with a high-resolution image of a blue Model 3 Tesla valued at approximately $47,000. The image caused AOC's expression to flicker with the first sign of genuine concern, a dawning realization that this event was drifting away from her control. Patel displayed the photo to the audience and cameras, noting with a dry, factual tone that it was undeniably her exiting the vehicle in the parking structure just 20 minutes prior. He complimented the car's design before she defensively interjected that it was an electric vehicle and therefore better for the environment. Attempting to regain the moral high ground, Patel continued without pausing, his voice smooth and relentless, noting that the vehicle was manufactured by Tesla Incorporated, a company led by CEO Elon Musk, a man she had tweeted about 47 times in the last 2 years alone. As Patel tapped his iPad again, the screen behind them shifted to display a comprehensive, scrolling compilation of her tweets regarding Elon Musk. The audience watched in silence as her own words filled the room. Descriptions of Musk as an oligarch, a union buster, a threat to democracy, and a billionaire toying with humanity's future. Patel allowed the silence to stretch for a moment, letting the audience absorb the visual evidence of her digital vitriol. He then leaned forward, clasping his hands together, and highlighted the contradiction with surgical precision. He noted that while she had utilized the strongest possible rhetoric to label Musk a danger to the Republic, she drove his car daily, thereby contributing an estimated $5,000 in profit directly to the pocket of the man she claimed to despise. The audience fell silent, leaning forward as the narrative shifted unexpectedly from policy to personal integrity. When AOC attempted to recover by reiterating the environmental benefits, claiming the climate crisis superseded corporate critiques, Patel gently interrupted to suggest the subway as an alternative. He pointed out that the subway ran merely 2 blocks from her apartment in the Navy Yard, and that she represented the Bronx and Queens, areas that boasted some of the finest public transit networks in the nation. He pointed out the profound irony that her party advocates for mass transit and the reduction of personal vehicle usage for the masses. Yet she utilizes a luxury personal vehicle to fight for the working class. When a stifled laugh emerged from the back of the audience, AOC appealed to the moderator, her voice rising in pitch, labeling the discussion ridiculous and arguing they should be discussing systemic hypocrisy rather than her personal commuting habits. Patel calmly replied that they were indeed discussing exactly that. Systemic hypocrisy, embodied in leadership. He leaned forward, adopting a conversational tone akin to explaining a difficult concept to a colleague, and expressed his confusion regarding her political brand. He noted that her entire identity was built on attacking billionaires and the evil 1%, yet her personal consumer habits, buying Musk's car, shopping at Amazon for convenience, and tweeting from a $3 trillion Apple iPhone, served only to enrich the very class she claimed to be warring against. He asked, rhetorically, how she reconciled the fact that her lifestyle was funded by and supported the very corporate structures she deemed immoral. Before she could formulate a rebuttal, he transitioned seamlessly to the topic of her income. He noted that her base congressional salary of $174,000 placed her firmly in the top 10% of American earners, meaning she earned more than 90% of the people she claimed to represent. As AOC's face began to flush with frustration, she argued that she did not control her congressional salary and that living in Washington, D.C. was expensive. But Patel countered that she kept all of it. He pointed out that despite advocating for wealth redistribution and higher taxes on the rich, a category she statistically occupied, there was no record of her voluntarily returning any portion of her salary to the Treasury or donating the excess to the social programs she championed. He sat back in his chair, spreading his hands in a gesture of openness, and suggested that perhaps the issue was not billionaires, but rather politicians who built lucrative careers attacking success while personally enjoying its benefits. He implied with devastating clarity that she was not actually opposed to capitalism itself, but merely resentful that others were succeeding at it on a larger scale than she was. The silence that followed was profound, a vacuum in the room where her usual slogans would have normally echoed. The moderator, sensing the tension, asked if the Congresswoman wished to respond. AOC opened her mouth, then closed it, her mind racing for a soundbite that would cut through the logic. But eventually, she dismissed the points as typical right-wing distraction tactics and ad hominem attacks designed to distract from the real issues. Attempting to regain control, AOC pivoted to her greatest hits, the viral moments that had established her brand, asserting that she was unafraid to make bold statements about inequality and to make people uncomfortable, unlike those who defended the status quo. She was obviously referring to the Met Gala, a topic her team had likely advised her to embrace as a display of courage. Patel smiled with a look that suggested she had made a tactical error, expressing his genuine desire to discuss that specific event. As AOC's confidence faltered, realizing she may have walked into a trap, Patel confirmed they were discussing the September 2021 gala and her Tax the Rich dress. When AOC claimed she brought her message to millionaires eating $500 plates of food, Patel finished her sentence, causing a reaction from the audience that hovered between laughter and shock. Ignoring the moderator's attempt to intervene, Patel pressed on, asking her to describe the event and, specifically, the cost of her ticket. When she stated she was invited and did not pay, Patel revealed the price from the Met Gala's website: $35,000 for an individual ticket and $270,000 for a table. He let the figure of $35,000 hang in the air, emphasizing that a single ticket to that party cost more than half the median household income in her district. Patel then displayed statistics on the screen showing the economic reality of her district in the Bronx: an average household income of $38,000, a poverty rate of 28%, and severe food insecurity. He drew a stark contrast between her constituents, who were choosing between rent and food, and her attendance at a $35,000 dinner wearing a designer dress to lecture the wealthy. When AOC insisted she was given access, Patel demanded to know who paid, explaining that as a federal employee, she was prohibited from accepting gifts over $50 from prohibited sources, implying she had either violated ethics rules or was withholding the donor's identity. Moving on before she could formulate a defense, Patel addressed the dress itself, designed by Aurora James, a purveyor of luxury goods. He noted that the designer received millions in free publicity and a massive spike in sales from AOC's appearance, pointing out the thick irony of wearing a tax-the-rich dress that enriched a luxury designer at an event for the ultra-wealthy, paid for by an unnamed donor. When AOC claimed she was trying to make a statement, Patel corrected her, asserting she was trying to go viral, and noted she had succeeded by posting 37 carefully curated photos that night, spending more time taking selfies than her constituents would spend eating that week. He concluded this segment by stating that this behavior was not activism or politics, but rather personal brand building, characterizing her as an influencer with a vote in Congress. The dismantling continued as Patel shifted his focus to the intricate construction of her backstory, aiming to expose the chasm between the curated mythology of Sandy from the block and the reality of her upbringing. He projected an image of a modest but comfortable suburban home in Yorktown Heights, Westchester County, a stark departure from the gritty Bronx narrative she frequently employed. Patel noted that this was one of the wealthiest counties in the United States, where her father had worked as an architect, and she had attended a high school with immense resources far removed from the crumbling infrastructure of the district she now represented. When AOC reacted emotionally, defending her past work as a bartender to help her mother, Patel conceded her hard work, but criticized the appropriation of working-class struggle as a permanent shield against criticism of her current elite status. He juxtaposed her past with her present reality. A luxury apartment in Navy Yard featuring a rooftop pool, concierge service, and a Peloton studio, all sustained by a salary that placed her in the top percentile of American earners. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried to the back of the room, declaring that she was no longer the working class, but rather the gentrifier, the elite who had become the very thing she claimed to despise. Tragically unaware of her own transformation, however, the most devastating blow to her moral authority was yet to come. Patel placed a single photograph on the center of the table, a grainy, heartbreaking image of a ceiling stained with water damage, buckets catching drips, and an elderly woman looking small and frail in a deteriorating room. He identified the date as June 2021 and the subject as her own grandmother in Puerto Rico, noting that AOC had posted this image to millions of followers with a caption blaming the government for the neglect. Patel then revealed the twist that silenced the room. Conservative commentator Matt Walsh had seen the image and, instead of engaging in a Twitter war, had organized a GoFundMe campaign that raised $104,000 in 24 hours from everyday Americans, many of them conservatives, to fix the roof. Patel's voice shook with controlled anger as he revealed that AOC had refused the money, demanding the campaign be shut down because it came from the wrong kind of people. He accused her of sacrificing her grandmother's well-being on the altar of her ideological purity, preferring the elderly woman to remain a victim so she could remain a savior, a decision he characterized not as leadership, but as narcissism masquerading as altruism. The brutality of the moment was absolute, leaving the image of the compassionate progressive in ruins and revealing a terrifying priority hierarchy where politics and brand superseded family. The silence in the studio following the exposure of the Puerto Rico incident was thick and suffocating, a heavy blanket of discomfort that settled over the audience. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat frozen, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the knuckles white against her skin. She had expected a debate on policy nuances, perhaps a theoretical argument about marginal tax rates or carbon capture technologies. She had not expected an autopsy of her personal morality. Patel, sensing that the character dismantling was complete, allowed the moment to linger for a beat longer than necessary before reaching beneath the podium. He did not retrieve a thin document or a single photograph this time. Instead, he lifted a heavy, black-bound binder. The sound of it hitting the table echoed like a gavel strike, signaling a shift from the personal to the professional. The label on the spine read, in stark white letters, Economic Impact Assessment, Amazon HQ 2. "We have discussed your ethics, Congresswoman," Patel said, his voice shifting from the fiery tone of a prosecutor to the cold analytical register of a forensic auditor. "Now, let us discuss your competence. Let us examine the single greatest economic blunder in the modern history of New York City, a catastrophe that bears your signature." AOC stiffened, recognizing the terrain. This was a battle she believed she had won, a narrative she had controlled for years. "I stood up to corporate greed," she interjected, her voice regaining a trace of its former defiance. I stopped a giveaway to the richest man in the world. I protected my community from gentrification. Patel opened the binder with deliberate slowness. Let us look at the mathematics of your victory, he corrected. In 2018, Amazon announced plans to build a second headquarters in Long Island City. It was the economic gold rush of our generation. Cities across North America debased themselves begging for it. Amazon chose New York. The deal promised 25,000 direct jobs, not warehouse positions, but corporate and technical roles, with an average salary of $150,000. It meant billions in tax revenue, a revitalization of local infrastructure, and a boom for small businesses. He looked up, his eyes locking onto hers. But you fought it. You led the charge to kill the deal. And when Amazon finally pulled out, taking those jobs to Virginia, you celebrated. You tweeted that you had saved New York City $3 billion. You claimed that money could now be invested in subways, schools, and teachers. Patel lowered his reading glasses, looking at her with an expression of profound pity. Congresswoman, that statement exposes a fundamental, disqualifying lack of financial literacy. You operated under the delusion that the city was writing a check for $3 billion to Jeff Bezos. You seemingly believed there was a pile of cash sitting in a vault that, if not given to Amazon, could be simply seized and redistributed. He leaned into the microphone, his voice sharp and didactic. That is not how tax incentives work. That $3 billion was a discount on the $27 billion in tax revenue Amazon would have paid over time. The money did not exist yet. You cannot spend a discount. By killing the deal, you didn't save $3 billion. You cost the city $27 billion in lost future revenue. You incinerated 25,000 careers before they could even begin. It was a handout, AOC insisted, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. Why should we pay a corporation to come here? Patel snapped back instantly. It wasn't a payment. It was an investment. If I offer you a 10% discount to buy a car from my dealership and you walk away, I didn't save the discount money. I lost the sale. You treated the economy of the greatest city in the world like a zero-sum game because you do not understand how wealth is created. You think wealth is something you confiscate. I know wealth is something you build. And because of your economic illiteracy, Amazon went to Virginia. Virginia got the jobs. Virginia got the tax revenue. And New York got nothing. The subways didn't get fixed. The teachers didn't get a raise. Because you chased away the very revenue stream that would have paid for them. He turned to the audience, pointing to a man in the back wearing a union jacket. You cost that man a contract. You cost 25,000 families a paycheck. You prioritized your ideological war against capitalism over the dinner tables of your own constituents. That isn't governance, Congresswoman. That is economic malpractice. Before the dust could settle on the economic argument, Patel moved ruthlessly to the final pillar of her platform, public safety. He pulled out a stack of enlarged tweets from the summer of 2020. The ink stark black against the white pages. Let us talk about the most dangerous hypocrisy of all, Patel said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. Let us talk about your advocacy to defund the polices while the city burned. He held up a tweet where she famously claimed that a budget of care should replace a budget of violence. While the Bronx was bleeding, you were tweeting slogans. You argued that cutting law enforcement budgets would make communities safer. You claimed that looters were just stealing bread to feed their families. I checked the police reports, Congresswoman. They weren't stealing bread. They were stealing Louis Vuitton bags and 60-inch televisions. To characterize violent opportunism as survival is an insult to every honest poor person in this country. He then produced the coup de grace, a federal election commission filing highlighted in neon yellow. But here is the darkness at the heart of your brand. While you were telling your constituents, working-class minorities, living in high-crime areas, that they didn't need police, that they should rely on social workers when a criminal kicks down their door. What were you doing for yourself? He held the document up to the camera. This is your campaign spending report. Since taking office, you have spent tens of thousands of dollars on private security. You have armed guards. When you are in D.C., you are protected by the Capitol Police. You live behind a wall of guns, Congresswoman. He stood up, walking to the edge of the stage. Do you see the irony? It is a feudal system. You sit in your ivory tower, protected by men with guns, and you issue decrees that the peasants outside the castle walls should give up their protection. You want us to live in a world without police, while you ensure that you never have to spend a second without them. You are safe. Your constituents are not. That isn't justice. That is aristocracy. The debate ended not with a shout, but with a number. Patel gathered his papers, looking at the Congresswoman one last time. We have spent 90 minutes peeling back the layers of your brand, he said quietly. We found a hypocrite who drives a Tesla and attends the Met Gala. We found a granddaughter who sacrificed her family for political pride. We found an economic amateur who destroyed 25,000 jobs. But perhaps the most damning statistic is this one. He pointed to a single, blank sheet of paper. You have been in Congress for nearly 2 terms. You have millions of followers. But in terms of actual legislation laws passed to help your constituents, your number is 0. You have passed 0 laws. You are not a revolutionary, Congresswoman. You are a product. You are a creation of social media algorithms, designed to generate outrage and engagement, but completely incapable of governing. You are the perfect politician for the Instagram age. Pretty filters, catchy captions, and absolutely no substance. He picked up his notepad and walked off the stage. America doesn't need influencers. America needs leaders. And until you learn the difference between a retweet and a result, you have no business holding that seat. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The hashtag number 0 laws trended globally within minutes. The media narrative, which had protected her for years, fractured under the weight of the undeniable footage. Pundits began to ask the question they had avoided. Is she effective? The answer, increasingly, was no. For weeks, AOC retreated from the spotlight, her team scrambling to pivot, to find a way to prove she was a serious legislator and not just a celebrity. It was this desperation, this need to prove her intellectual weight, that led her, 6 months later, into the lion's den of the United States Senate. The Hart Senate office building is designed to intimidate. Its corridors are vast, echoing with the footsteps of power. Its hearing rooms are caverns of marble and mahogany. On a Wednesday morning in March, hearing room 216 was packed to capacity for a special hearing on the budgetary implications of climate legislation. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat at the witness table, a solitary figure against the dark wood. She looked impeccable in white, determined to erase the memory of the Patel debate. She had spent 45 minutes giving an impassioned opening statement about the existential threat of climate change, using phrases like intergenerational justice and systemic transformation. She felt safe. She felt in control. Then, Chairman Lindsey Graham leaned forward. The chair recognizes the ranking member, Senator Kennedy from Louisiana. John Kennedy did not look like an executioner. With his shock of white hair, his slightly rumpled suit, and his reading glasses perched precariously on his nose, he resembled a confused country lawyer who had wandered into the Capitol looking for the library. This affectation, the aw-shucks demeanor of a simple man from the bayou, was the single most dangerous weapon in the Senate. AOC saw a relic. She did not know she was looking at an Oxford-educated Rhodes Scholar. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," Kennedy drawled, his voice a slow river of molasses. He smiled warmly at AOC. "And thank you, Congresswoman. You speak very eloquently. Truly." He took off his glasses and cleaned them with his tie. Now, I'm just a simple guy. I don't know much about this modern monetary theory. I just try to balance my checkbook. But I want to understand. You're talking about the Green New Deal. Big ideas. 10 to 15 trillion dollars, right? Approximately, AOC said, confident. The cost of inaction is infinite. Right. Infinite? Kennedy nodded. But let's talk about the cost of action, just so I can explain it to the folks back in Madisonville. He reached into his pocket. The room went silent. He pulled out a cheap gray solar-powered calculator, the kind you buy at Walmart for $5. He placed it on the mahogany table. It looked absurdly small against the grandeur of the Senate. I brought this along, Kennedy said, sliding it across the polished wood toward her, just in case we got into the weeds. AOC stared at the device. It sat there like an unexploded ordnance. You said we pay for this by taxing the rich, Kennedy continued. Let's do the math. A 70% marginal tax rate on income over $10 million. The CBO says that raises $300 billion a year. Your plan costs $1.2 trillion a year. We are $900 billion short. Every single year. He pointed to the calculator. Show me, Congresswoman. Type it in. Where does the other $900 billion come from? Do we print it? Do we borrow it? Or do we tax the middle class? AOC's hand trembled slightly. She looked at the calculator, then at Kennedy, and for the first time, she realized there was no slogan that could bridge the gap between revenue and reality. The trap had been sprung. Sensing that the domestic arithmetic had become a quagmire from which she could not extricate herself, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez executed a strategic retreat to what she perceived as safer, more fertile ideological ground. If the raw numbers of the American tax code could not support her ambitions, she would appeal to the shining examples across the Atlantic, the egalitarian utopias that had served as the North Stars of the progressive movement for decades. She pushed the gray calculator slightly away, creating physical distance from the accusatory zeros, and launched into a spirited defense of the European model, citing Sweden, Denmark, and Germany as definitive proof that a society could have robust social safety nets, aggressive climate goals, and a thriving economy simultaneously. She spoke with renewed confidence, her voice rising as she described nations where healthcare was a right, where education was free, and where the wealthy purportedly paid their fair share to support the common good, painting a picture of a benevolent state that cared for its citizens from cradle to grave without the brutality of American capitalism. It was a compelling narrative, one that resonated deeply with her base and had garnered millions of likes on social media. But as she spoke, Senator Kennedy did not look impressed. Instead, he reached into his leather folder and extracted a new set of documents. These, stamped with the insignias of the OECD and various European finance ministries, his expression shifting from curiosity to the weary patience of a professor preparing to correct a student who has not done the required reading. Kennedy waited for her to finish her paean to Scandinavian socialism before he spoke, his voice retaining that deceptively gentle, southern lilt that made the coming dissection feel less like an attack and more like a hard lesson in reality. He acknowledged that those countries were indeed beautiful places with wonderful people, but then he asked her to look at the specific mechanisms they used to pay for the generosity she so admired. He held up a tax table for Denmark and Sweden, placing it next to the ignored calculator. He pointed out that while she constantly spoke of taxing the rich, the European models she championed were actually funded by aggressively taxing the middle class and the working poor. He walked her through the value-added tax rates, effectively a national sales tax on everything from groceries to clothing, which hovered around 25% in the countries she cited. He asked her, with a piercing directness, if she was prepared to go back to the Bronx and tell a single mother that the price of every gallon of milk, every pair of shoes, and every school supply would increase by 25% to fund her vision. He watched as the realization hit her that the European dream was built on a regressive tax structure that hit working families the hardest, a reality that stood in stark contradiction to her progressive branding. He did not stop at consumption taxes. He moved ruthlessly to the income tax brackets that sustained these welfare states. He explained that in the United States, the top marginal tax rates only applied to those earning hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, but in the nations she idolized, the top rates kicked in at middle-class income levels. He showed her the data for Belgium and Germany, where a school teacher or a factory worker could lose nearly half their paycheck to the government. He asked her if her definition of taxing the rich included a firefighter making $60,000 a year, because that was who paid for the system in Europe. AOC attempted to parry this by returning to the concept of a wealth tax on billionaires, arguing that the accumulated capital of the ultra-wealthy was the true target. But Kennedy was ready with a history lesson that was as devastating as it was undeniable. He cited the experiment of France in the 1,990 seconds, explaining how they had implemented precisely the kind of wealth tax she proposed, only to repeal it a few years later because it caused a massive capital flight. He described how thousands of millionaires simply left the country, taking their businesses, their investments, and their tax revenue with them, leaving the French government with a budget deficit and a stagnant economy. He asked her why she thought the result would be any different in the United States, asking if she believed capital was less mobile in the 21st century than it was 20 years ago. The interrogation then pivoted to Germany, the poster child for the green energy transition she sought to emulate. AOC had frequently cited Germany's Energiewende as the blueprint for her Green New Deal, a proof of concept that an industrial powerhouse could run on renewables. Kennedy slid a chart across the table that displayed two diverging lines, one showing Germany's skyrocketing electricity prices and the other showing their stagnant carbon emissions. He explained that by shutting down their nuclear power plants, a policy she also supported, Germany had forced itself to rely on wind and solar, which were intermittent, forcing them to burn lignite coal, the dirtiest form of fossil fuel, just to keep the lights on when the wind didn't blow. He revealed that German households paid 3 times more for electricity than American households, a cost that functioned as a crushing tax on the poor. He asked her if her plan for environmental justice included tripling the utility bills of the grandmothers in Queens, who were already struggling to pay for heat in the winter. He showed her headlines about German factories closing down and moving to China because they could no longer afford the energy costs, asking if deindustrializing America was part of her platform. For the first time in the hearing, AOC looked truly cornered, stripped of the ability to use foreign examples as a shield, because Kennedy had exposed those examples as cautionary tales rather than aspirations. Desperate to salvage the moment, AOC retreated to her final line of defense: modern monetary theory. She argued that as a sovereign nation, the United States could simply print the money needed for these investments, that deficits were a myth used to suppress social progress. Kennedy looked at her with genuine sadness. He asked her a simple question about inflation. He asked that if the government printed trillions of dollars to pay for these programs without offsetting taxation, what would happen to the price of bread in the Bronx? What would happen to rent? He forced her to confront the reality that inflation is the cruelest tax of all, one that destroys the savings of the elderly and the purchasing power of the poor. He asked her if she understood that printing money didn't create resources, it only diluted the value of the labor of the working class. The theoretical framework she had relied upon crumbled when applied to the reality of a grocery bill. The audience in the room, even the young activists with their green armbands, began to shift uncomfortably. They were watching the collision of a beautiful slogan with an ugly reality. The climax of the hearing arrived not with a shout, but with a silence. Kennedy returned to the shortfall he had identified earlier, the $900 billion annual gap. He asked her, point blank, to pick up the calculator and identify a single revenue source to fill that hole. He offered options: a value-added tax, a middle-class payroll tax increase, a national sales tax. He watched her face as she realized that admitting to any of them would be political suicide, while denying them meant admitting her plan was a fantasy. She stayed silent for a long, agonizing minute, the silence stretching out until it became a physical weight in the room. In that silence, the myth of the policy wonk evaporated. What remained was a politician who had sold a vision without ever calculating the bill. Kennedy finally broke the silence by noting that in Louisiana, if you buy a truck you can't afford, the bank takes it back. But in Washington, if you propose a law you can't fund, you call it justice. He closed his folder, leaving the calculator sitting there, displaying a zero that felt like a verdict. The aftermath of that Wednesday morning was swift and irrevocable. The clips of the exchange went viral instantly, but unlike her previous viral moments, these were not celebrations of her wit. They were autopsies of her competence. The calculator moment became a cultural touchstone, a shorthand for the dangers of performative governance. Conservative media amplified the takedown, but even mainstream economists and liberal commentators struggled to defend her. The narrative that had begun with Kash Patel, the idea that she was an Instagram account with a vote hardened into a political reality. The zero laws statistic Patel had cited, combined with the image of her staring blankly at a $5 calculator to form a devastating portrait of ineffectiveness. In the months that followed, the landscape of her career shifted. The adoring magazine covers became less frequent. The invitations to late-night talk shows dried up. A primary challenger emerged, not from the right, but from the moderate wing of her own party, running on a platform of doing the math. Although she survived the challenge, the margin was razor-thin, a warning shot from a district that had grown tired of being a prop in a national theater production. AOC remained in Congress, but her role changed. She became quieter, more cautious. She began to hire serious economists for her staff. She stopped posting videos of herself cooking while ranting about capitalism and started attending committee hearings with prepared notes. The arrogance of the influencer had been burned away by the humiliation of the audit. Ultimately, the story of Kash Patel's ambush and John Kennedy's calculator was not just a story about one politician. It was a parable for a political age that had prioritized aesthetics over arithmetic. It was a reminder that while you can build a movement on Twitter, you have to govern in reality. Reality has costs. Reality has trade-offs. Reality requires math. And as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez learned in the harsh light of the Senate chamber, reality does not care about your follower count. The calculator sits on the table still, a silent monument to the moment when the performance ended and the bill finally came due.